Hello everyone, welcome back. We were doing MCQ number 16. MCQ number 16 says, what is the definition of profit maximization? Now, if you look at the options available and if you look at the definition of profit maximization is what? That the firm is trying to earn as much of profit as it can given the available amount of resources and the level of production activity, right? So, what is the definition of profit maximization? Looking at the options available, option A says the firm is allocating a proportion of profit to other business objectives. B says the firm is making as much profit as possible. C says the firm is making higher levels of profit this year than last year. And D says the firm is making the same amount of profit this year as last year. So if you look at the options available, the best option is option B, which says the firm is making as much profit as possible. That means the maximum profit it could given the amount of resources. If you look at the other options available, they aren't appropriate. Why? Because they aren't referring to the definition of profit maximization. Profit maximization is at the point where the cost level are minimum, right? D doesn't make sense because it's comparison to the last year. It says it's the same as the last year. C says it's making higher levels of profit this year than last year. A says the firm is allocating a proportion of profit to other business activities. That doesn't make sense. So you can chop A, C, and D, and the correct response for MCQ number 16 is B. So we've shaded B for MCQ number 16. Moving on to MCQ number 17. MCQ number 17 says the Central Bank of Mexico set its rate of interest to try to keep the rise in the price level to only 3%. So now what is the Central Bank of Mexico doing is that it's trying to ascertain that level of interest rate such that the price level or the level of inflation hovers around only 3%. The level of inflation, the price level hovers around 3%. So this is exactly what the question is asking us. They are saying which government aim was it directly trying to achieve. So this means that what was the objective of the central bank in targeting the interest rate such that the price level rises only to 3%. Balance of payment equilibrium, B says economic growth, C says full employment, and D says low inflation. And as we know by the data available that it is referring to the price level, it is referring to the level of inflation. 17, it's D. It's trying to keep the surging prices at bare minimum, right? Control the level of inflation. So 17, it's D. So we'll shade in D. Number 18. Number 18 gives us a table. It says it shows a forecast for a government budget for year one and year two. So these are the forecasts that what the government expects that this would be the revenue it will be earning in year one. This would be the revenue it will be earning in year two. This would be the spending, and this would be the spending in year two. This means what? Revenue is that it's earnings and spending it's that the amount it would be spending, right? So by revenue means that by way of taxes it would be earning, right? This would be the government's income, and spending means it would be spending by way of spending on government infrastructure, provision of public goods and merit goods, and development of infrastructures, availabilities, right? Amenities, right? Or unemployment benefits, right? So, what is the forecast budget for year two show? Now, let's look at the figures first before looking at the options. What has happened in year two? Now, first, you tell me in year one, $50 billion was the revenue, and the government was spending 60. So, it was earning 50, spending 60. This means what? There was a deficit of $10 billion. It was a deficit, a budget deficit of $10 billion. Why? Because the spending was greater than its earning, or the spending was greater than its revenue. What happened in year two? In year two, the revenue was 55 and the spending was 60. The revenue increased and the spending remained the same. So, what happened? The budget deficit reduced to a $5 billion. Now, the difference in revenue and spending, again, the spending is more, spending is 60, you're earning 55, so the deficit reduced from 10 to 5. Now they are saying, what does the forecast government budget for year 2 shows? Now what does it shows? That the deficit reduced. The deficit reduced, right? In year 1, it was showing a deficit of $10 billion. In year 2, the deficit went to $5 billion. So now let's look at it. It's not a surplus. right? So you can chop C. It was never a surplus. It was always a deficit. So it could be either A or B. Now let's read A and B. A says the budget deficit decreased when compared with year one, and B says the budget deficit increased when compared with year one. The budget deficit decreased. Why? Because it was initially at $10 billion and then it went up to $5 billion. So A is the correct answer. So for MCQ number 18, we'll shade in A. I hope it's clear. Number 19, moving forward. The graph shows the impact of a tax on the supply of petrol gas. Now, what has happened? That we were experiencing a perfectly inelastic demand curve. This means whatever happens, the demand is going to be the same, right? Now, what happened? The government imposed a tax. Now, when the government imposed a tax on gasoline or the petrol, what happened? The supply curve shifted upwards, inwards, from S1 to S2. Now they are asking you what? They're asking you what can be concluded from this graph. The government will receive no tax revenue. No, the government would be receiving tax revenue because the tax is imposed. So this is incorrect. B says the impact of the tax will be shared between the consumer and producer. No, it's wrong. Why? I'll tell you. The impact of the tax fall entirely upon the consumer. That's exactly the answer. Why? Because the demand over here is perfectly inelastic. So this means that the entire tax burden will be borne by the consumer in the form of high prices. Initially, the price was P. Now, because of the tax, this is the entirely tax amount. This shaded region or this surge in price from P to P1 is the tax amount. And this tax burden falls on whom? On the consumer. Why? Because the demand is perfectly inelastic. This demand curve, which shows that the demand is perfectly inelastic, it is the cause why the entire burden of the tax fell onto the consumer. Otherwise, it would have been shared between the consumer and the producer. Right? So for MCQ number 19, it's option C. So we'll shade in C. All right. Moving forward. MCQ number 20. MCQ number 20 says what is most likely to result from a successful supply side policy. Now, notice I've underlined the keywords. They are asking what would happen because of a supply side policy that was successful. So, the supply side policy was successful. First, you tell me what are supply side policies. Supply side policies are policies that aim to increase aggregate supply or increase the productive potential of an economy. What does the productive potential of an economy means? That more and more resources, more and more goods and services are produced in an economy. The entire PPC shifts outwards, right? We want more output. We want more goods and services. So from PPC 1, we move to PPC 2, right? So this is what happened when, let's say, capital goods, let's say consumer goods. I'm drawing a very basic uh, very rough diagram just in order to make sure that it's retained in your mind. You see, whenever the keywords come, the concept should be uh, highlighted, right? The concept should automatically come into your mind. You should automatically recall it, right? So, supply side policies aim to increase the productive potential of the economy. Now they're saying the supply side policy was successful. So, what would happen because of a successful supply side policy? Right? This is how you will interpret the question. Now let's read the options. A deterioration in the current account of the balance of payment. Now it was a successful supply side policy, but a deterioration in the balance of payment is not something we want because it was successful, so you'll chop. C says increase inflation, D says increase structural unemployment. Now if you look at A, C, and D, they are all are negative. But here the question was that the supply side policy was successful. So by elimination, we've arrived at B. But let's look at the logic. Yes, economic growth, because that's exactly what the aim of a supply side policy is to increase the productive potential of the economy when the entire PPC curve shifts outwards. And the entire economy experiences economic growth, that is, more goods and services being produced, a higher standard of living, higher GDP per capita, right? So it's higher standard of living. So it's economic growth in this way, right? So for 20, it is B. All right. MCQ number 21. Now, don't be overwhelmed looking at this table. I'll explain it to you. 21 MCQ says The table shows the rates of unemployment and real GDP growth for an economy in year one and year two. Now, what they've done is they've given us a table and they've given us statistics for two variables: A, the rate of unemployment, B, the rate of real GDP growth in year one and year two. Now, what happened? Here in year one, if you look at MCQ number 21, here rate of unemployment was 3%. In year two, the rate of unemployment rose. The rate of unemployment rose from 3 to 7%. So unemployment rose. What about the real GDP growth rate? The real GDP growth rate was a positive 3 and it fell. It became a negative. So the real GDP growth rate fell. There was a decline. Now, what are they asking? They're asking which combination of policy measures would be most effective in returning the economy to the year one level of activity. Now, what are they saying? They are saying the economy is having a situation in year two. What is the situation? That unemployment is rising and the real GDP is falling. This is what happening in year two. The unemployment is rising and the real GDP is falling. Now they want to go back to a year one level of activity. That means what? This means they want to increase employment or reduce the level of unemployment. And they want to improve the real GDP growth rate. So, what policy measures would you adopt? You want to go back to the year one situation. So, you want to reduce your unemployment and you want to increase your economic activity. You want to reduce your unemployment and you want to increase your economic activity. So, how will you do that? What policy measures should you adopt? So, this means there should be a combination, right? Two policies. Now, A says a decrease in direct taxes. A says a decrease in direct taxes and an increase in the rate of interest. So, now if you increase direct taxes, you are reducing the purchasing power. And the rate of interest will reduce the level of economic activity, but we want to increase the economic activity. So, he'll chop A. B says a decrease in government expenditure and an increase in the interest rate. Again, you are discouraging the level of economic activity because when the government is not going to spend and the interest rate is going to be high, so the level of economic activity would fall. But we want to increase the level of economic activity, so we'll chop B. C says an increase in direct taxes. Again, if you'll impose more of direct taxes, so purchasing power will reduce and economic activity would fall, right? People would be spending less, aggregate demand would fall, but we want to improve the level of employment level, right? People would be discouraged to work if you are increasing direct taxes because you'll be charging more of income taxes. A decrease in the rate of interest, but you want a combination. So just by decreasing the rate of interest won't help. You want both policies to be positive, so you'll chop C. Let's see D. D says an increase in government expenditure. Yes, we want government expenditure to increase so that unemployment reduces, and economic activity increases, and a decrease in the rate of interest. Again, the rate of interest will decrease, so the economic activity would improve. So this is exactly what we want. So for MCQ number 21, it is D. So we'll shade in D for MCQ number 21. Now, let's look at MCQ number 22. MCQ number 22 is a little detailed, but it's very easy. I'll explain it to you. MCQ number 22 gives us selected indicators for the labor market of an economy in year one and year two. So it's giving us statistics for different variables for 2 years, right? In millions. Now, if you look at it, the first variable is total labor force. So the total labor force remained the same, $30 million. Employed workers. Initially, there were 25 million employed. Now, in year two, it rose from 25 to 28. So 3 million people more were employed in year two. Long-term unemployed, people who had been unemployed for more than 6 months and above, for more than a year and above, how much were they? From 1 million to 2 million. So people who were unemployed also rose by a 1 million. Employment in manufacturing. Now, initially 4 million people were employed in manufacturing. Now only 2 million people are employed. So employment in manufacturing fell by 2 million. However, employment in services initially was 13 and now it has risen to 16. So now more people are employed in the tertiary sector, right? So it's a plus over here. Now, they are saying, according to the table, what is the most likely type of unemployment in year two. So now, if you look at these different indicators, what type of unemployment it is suggesting? It is suggesting a cyclical unemployment, a frictional, a seasonal, or structural. Before you answer this, you need to know the types of unemployment. What was cyclical unemployment? Can anybody tell me before I proceed? Yes, what was cyclical unemployment? Cyclical unemployment is unemployment because of lack of aggregate demand. So, are these statistics showing lack of aggregate demand? No, there's something else. So, you'll chop A. B says frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is temporary unemployment. Temporary unemployment that arises from workers in between jobs. That means you are moving from one job to another. It's a temporary unemployment. Is this a temporary unemployment? Here, there was long term unemployment. People move from manufacturing to services. So these aren't signs of frictional unemployment. What about seasonal unemployment? Seasonal is again a type of frictional unemployment only. And seasonal unemployment is a lack, a fall in demand in a particular time of the year. A fall in demand of particular labor, a fall in demand for labor during certain time of the year. During certain time of the year. Right? So it can't be seasonal. What about structural unemployment? Is it structural unemployment? Yes, this is structural unemployment. Why? Because structural unemployment refers to long term changes in patterns of demand, long term changes in patterns of demand and production methods. Right? So, here, when people move from manufacturing to services, what happens? This shows that there were changes in the way the people were employed in the sector. So it shows signs for structural employment. So hence for 22, it is D. See how we have made the logic. All right. Moving forward. MCQ number 23. MCQ number 23 again gives us a table. It shows the percentage changes in earnings and consumer prices for 4 countries. Which country has experienced the greatest increase in real income? Now, they are giving us changes in earnings and changes in consumer prices. So, we want to derive the real income changes. So, the earnings are also increasing and the prices are also increasing. That means the inflation level. So, how will we calculate the real income? Whether there is an increase in the real income, we'll calculate the difference between the two. So, all you need to do is subtract the earnings from the consumer prices, and whichever country is giving you the highest increase in the highest difference, that country is going to experience the highest increase in its real income. So a 12.5 minus a 9.5 is giving you what? Is giving you a plus 3. 4 subtract a 2 is giving you a positive 2. 8.5 subtract 5 is giving you a positive 3.5, and a 4 and a 4 subtract, it's a 0. So which country is giving you the highest difference? C. 3.5. This means this country is the one that experienced the highest increase in its real income. That means the difference between the rate of changes in the income level and changes in the prices. This is going to ensure that yes, your income increase in its real terms, right? So for 23, it has to be C. Moving forward, MCQ number 24. MCQ number 24 gives us a table. It shows the distribution of income as measured by GDP for 3 countries in a year. So they are giving us how the incomes are distributed as a measure of GDP for 3 countries: Belgium, Mexico, and US. Now, what have they done is that they have distributed the GDP by each 20% of the households in such a way that the highest 20% till the lowest 20%. So they have divided the GDP into different income slots, showing you the distribution of income. Right. So this means that the highest 20% in Belgium received 36.4 of the GDP and the lowest 8.9. In Mexico, it was 51.7 and the lowest received 5.4. In US, it was 46.9 and the lowest received 5.1. So if you look at it this way, the highest and the lowest, the difference between the highest and the lowest shows us what? the income disparity, the income distribution. So, which country, I wanted to explain you this point to you later, but I'm just trying to give you a picture at first hand only. Which country do you think has the least income disparity? Yes, it's Belgium. So this means the distribution of income is most equal in Belgium. That's the correct answer, right? It's for 24, it's C. But I'll explain you why it can't be the other options available as well, right? Now let's look at the options. Again, I told you whenever it's a table and it looks overwhelming, the best way to solve is looking at the options, right? Now, let's look at option D. Why it can't be D? D says the highest 20% of households in the US receive half of the country's income. Highest 20% of US were receiving what? Now I'll erase this, all right? Highest 20% in US was receiving how much? Highest 20% in US was receiving 46.9. What are they saying? They receive half of country's income. Half of country's income means 50%. But highest 20% is receiving 46.9. So 46.9 is less than 50. So this is wrong. So you'll chop D. B. B says the lowest 40% of households in Belgium. Now, the lowest 40% of household in Belgium. The lowest 40. The lowest 40 means you'll add this 8.9 and the second lowest. So the lowest 40% means 14.3 plus an 8.9. What will it give you? 14.3 and an 8.9. What will it give you? 23.2%. The lowest 40%, which is 23.2%, receives a larger share of the country's income than the highest 20% of households. Are the lowest 40% receiving more than the highest 20%? What was the highest 20% receiving in Belgium? Highest 20% in Belgium was receiving 36.4. So this is what they mean. That the lowest 40%, which means 8.9 plus 14.3, which is 23.2, is getting more than the highest 20%, which is 36.4. It's wrong. They're getting 23.2. The highest is getting 36.4. It's wrong. Right? So you chop B. It's wrong. A says the lowest 20% of households in US. What is the lowest 20% of households in US? Which is 5.1%, have lower incomes than the lowest 20% of households in Mexico. And what were the households in Mexico receiving? 5.4%. So the lowest 20% in US is receiving 5.1%, and in Mexico they are getting 5.4%. But they are saying they have lower incomes. So this means we are talking in absolute terms. But here we are not talking in absolute terms. We are giving the percentages. Here we are making a comparison. We are making relative poverty, right? So it's wrong. Hence, I've shown you by elimination and by logic that for MCQ number 24, it's C because it's showing the least amount of disparity between the highest 20 and the lowest 20, right? So for 24, it's C. Number 25. Number 25 says the number of people in relative poverty in a country is decreasing. What do you mean relative poverty? Relative poverty means that people are poor in terms of other country, in terms of others in the country. People are poor in terms of others in the country. Their income is low to enjoy the average standard of living. So this means it's decreasing. This means it's improving. What is most likely of cause of this? Why do you think relative poverty would fall? So your a relative poverty would fall, a contractionary fiscal policy. If the fiscal policy is being reduced, this means if the government is reducing its spending or it's increasing in taxes, so it should worsen and not improve, so you'll chop it. A decrease in the national minimum wage. If you reduce the minimum wage level, so you will worsen poverty. You will worsen poverty. Standard of living should fall and not rise, but here the relative poverty is decreasing, so you'll chop B. D says an increase in barriers to entry for multinationals. If you reduce multinationals, so you will decrease the standard of living of your country. But here the standard of living is improving. That is why the relative poverty is reducing. So you chop D. So by elimination, we have arrived at C. But by logic also it makes sense, because when you invest in education, the standard of living of your country improve, your people are better off, so the relative poverty would reduce. So hence for MCQ number 25, it's C. Moving forward. Number 26. African economies may have rapid economic growth because of large increase in their working age population. So now the working age is increasing. There are more people entering into the labor force. People entering into labor force. So the people entering into labor force is increasing. So what do you think? Which factor of production will be growing? Exactly. It's labor. So for 26, it's A. Moving forward. Number 27. Which statement shows two benefits for consumers from specialization at a national level? Now notice, you are specializing at a national level, your country is specializing, and what benefits will be for consumers? From the consumers aspect, there should be two benefits. A says decreased prices and better quality. Excellent, that's the correct answer. But now let's look at why it can't be the other options. B says decreased profits and high quality raw materials. We are looking from the aspect of consumers, but here the option is talking about in terms of producers, and that too it's in a negative sense because it's decreased profits. It's wrong. Increased choice or right and high transport costs. We don't want transport costs. Transport costs is talking in terms of producers, and again it's a negative aspect. So it's wrong because they're asking us two benefits, and that too for consumers. Increase productivity and increase economies of scale. Here, these are both advantages from the aspect of producer and not for consumer, but we want for consumers. So we'll chop D. So hence by elimination and logic, A is the correct answer. So for 27, I've shaded in A. 28. A multinational opens up a new factory in a host country. So now MNC is setting up a new factory, a new of its operations in a host country. All right. So, what is the possible cost of this new factory to the host country? So, now the country in which it is expanding, it's setting up its production activity. What would be a cost for that host country? For instance, if an MNC is coming to Pakistan, what would be a disadvantage to Pakistan? Right? What would be a negative aspect, a disadvantage? Increase access to modern technology. That's a positive aspect. That's not a negative. That's wrong. Increased competition for host country industries. Yes, that's correct, because the domestic industry is going to have a hard time, a tough time keeping up with the quality products of the MNC, right? That's the correct answer. C says increased employment for workers. So if employment level is increasing, so unemployment level is reducing, so standard of living would be improving, so your country would be better off and not worse off, but it says a cost. So this means something negative, but this is something positive, so you will reduce it. You chop it, it's incorrect. D says increase tax revenue for the government. So if the government is enjoying now more taxes, should be better off. But here it says we want a cost. Something is happening to the host country in negative way. So you chop D, because A, C, and D are all talking about positive aspect, but we want a cost. So it's only B. Where because of increased competition, the domestic producers would be suffering, right? So 28, it has to be B. Number 29. The diagram shows the change in the exchange rate market for country X is dollars. So now what is happening? This is showing you the exchange rate for a country's currency. Initially, we were at here, D1. This was the price level and this was the quantity demanded. Now what happened? Suddenly there was an increase in the currency's demand. So what happened? Because of that, there is an increase in the price of our currency. And as a result, the price rose and the quantity demanded also rose. Now they are saying which change in country X would have caused it. Now, why do you think there would have been a rise in the demand for the currency? Why a rise in the currency demand? Why a rise in the demand for currency? What could have caused this? What could be the reason? Now, let's look at the options. A says a fall in its international competitiveness. Now, if there was a fall in international competitiveness, so the demand should have fallen and not rising. But here the demand for the currency is rising. So you chop A. B says a fall in its level of interest rates. Now, again, if a fall of its interest rates, so the demand for the currency should have been falling. People would be demanding less. It would not be lucrative to invest in your country's currency, right? Because they would be getting less returns. So the demand should fall, but here the demand is rising. So you will chop B. D says a rise in its imports of goods. If there was a rise in imports of goods, so it would cause the supply to increase. But here the demand is increasing. Demand. But the rise in imports is causing the supply to increase, so you chop D. So by elimination, we have arrived at C, which is correct. But why by logic? A rise in its exports of services. If if there is a rise in its exports of services, this means what? That once the country is exporting more of its goods, so the foreigners would need more to convert their country's currency to your country's currency, right? So they would be demanding more of your country's currency, more of your country's dollars in order to repay you because your exports are increasing, right? So hence for 29, it is C. So we'll shade in C. Moving forward to the last MCQ for today, MCQ number 30. MCQ number 30 says what is the most likely cause of an increased current account surplus in a country. So now there's a current account surplus in a country of your country's current of your country. This means what? That the exports are more than the imports, right? It's a positive situation. Now they're saying what would be the cause of this, right? What could have caused this? Now let's look at the options. A says lower prices for the country's exports. Yes, that's correct. Because cheaper exports means that more exports were lucrative. So you were able to export more. So your current accounts would be in a surplus situation. That's correct. But why it can't be B, C, and D? B says a higher exchange rate for the country. If there would be a higher exchange rate for the country, so your exports would not have rising. It would have been expensive. It would be a negative situation. Economic growth in the country. If there would have been an economic growth in the country, so the country's domestic demand would have been rising, and it has nothing to do with a country's current account surplus. So then you won't have been exporting it. Domestically, there would be a rise in the demand for your goods and services, right? So you'll chop C. D says a recession in trade partner countries. So if there would have been a recession in trade partner countries, so there would have been less of trade. Less of trade means less of exports of goods and services. So this means so the current account would not be in a positive situation. It would be in a negative situation. There would have been less exports. So you chop D. B, C, and D are all depicting a negative situation and are not reflecting the situation as given by the data. So hence by elimination and by logic, we have arrived that the lower prices have contributed to a positive situation in the country's current account surplus, contributing to more exports being more than imports. Hence, your current account would be surplus situation. Exports are more than imports. So for MCQ number 13, I'll shade in A as the correct answer. All right, hope you all have understood and you liked what we all did today. Stay tuned, subscribe to my channel. Happy learning. Take care. We'll be coming back more with such exciting papers.